All of this brings us to our project for this week, which is going to be working with image manipulation inside of a project called the Image Viewer project. You'll have a GUI, and that GUI will allow us to load an image, display the image, and then apply different filters. So this is a this is like Photoshop 0.5, Photoshop 0.05, or less. It's relatively basic. We have these four classes at the beginning: an image viewer, the image file manager, the image panel, and the objects first image, which wraps some of the lower level Java image handling. You will end up with, I want to say, whoops, wrong one. You will end up with this, where we realize that there's a lot of code repetition and we need to clean things up. Now here's the good news. You are not building from here to here. What's going to happen is you will be given here and you will be extending this to add more filters and wire your filters into the interface. But along the way, you need to go through the exercises in the textbook to understand why the interfaces are created, why the abstraction is necessary here, the abstract class, how we're actually going to do this. And you're going to learn a little bit about the structure, internal structure of images, at least at the color level, along the way. But let's go back to the simpler one for now. If I compile this and make a new image viewer object, here is my image viewer, and it can pull up a file menu with shortcut keys, and we have a darker and a lighter and a threshold, and we get a little about dialog box as well. So if we choose open, and I go and I look at the images folder, and let me grab that JPEG of London. Okay, so it gives me the name of the file. It tells me the file was successfully loaded. Here I have Westminster Tower, along the River Thames, and the Houses of Parliament there in the background. Classic photo. And if I go ahead and apply the lighter threshold, and the lighter threshold, and the lighter threshold, okay, now it's like London has had a catastrophic nuclear event, because we just keep taking the pixels and making them lighter. There is no undo. If I try to make things darker, it can only work with the pixels as they currently exist, and so the image is pretty much gone. So let me reload, and if I were to start and make it darker and darker and darker and darker and darker and so on, eventually you get this amazing picture of London at night. And if we go and use the threshold, it's looking at the pixels, and if they're less than a certain value, they'll become black, and if they're more than a certain value, they'll become white, and if they are between the two values, they turn gray. And so you kind of get this I mean, apart from the funkiness with the clouds, this detail in through the Houses of Parliament is actually kind of cool. Okay. So this is the base image viewer 1, but let's go ahead and look at the objects in question. Image viewer is responsible for the GUI. So having all of those menus and knowing what to fire comes from that. There is an image file manager class which handles the file load and file save. Right now we're just dealing with file loading. There is the image panel class, which displays the image inside of the GUI, and then there's the objects first image, the OF image, which is the mathematical model of the 2D image that then gets displayed inside the image panel. So OF image is actually a subclass of the Java class buffered image, and it's a 2D grid of pixels. It has the ability to get a pixel, and it gets a color object back from that. And you can also set a pixel with a new color, and that's what allows us to modify these images. We can also get the width of the image and the height of the image, which would be useful for resizing. Because the pixels are modeled by java.auth.color, that means that you can use any of the color constructors to make a new pixel color to then push into setPixel. So, kind of the basics of how this is laid out inside of the project. And this is going to be code that you end up not touching for your work, so it's just good to go over it. Image viewer has the frame and then also has an image panel object. And our image panel object is going to return an image panel. Our image panel constructor will return the image panel, and that just gets added to the content frame. In terms of loading an image, we have an open file method, and the ... dots indicate code being removed from this slide, but just for the general purpose. When we open file, we need to get the selected file, which will give us a file object. We're going to ask our image file manager to load the image, which is pointed to by the selected file, and store that into the OF image. And then we're going to tell our image panel to take that image file, that OF image object, and set that as its image, and then pack the frame so it shows up on screen. You are more than welcome to dive into this code and poke at it a little bit more. The file handling information methodology is a good model for what we're going to do next week with doing some file reads and writes. Poking around at how they are putting a wrapper class. The OF image is a wrapper class, a simplification of the buffered image to make it easier for us to do our work, but you might want to dive into that. But as with all things object-oriented, as long as the objects do what they say they're going to do, and we know what they're supposed to do and what we need to tell them, we do not have to focus on how it's getting the job done. We can just accept that they do their work, and we can do our work on top of them. So, this is the basic structure of how the image viewer is going to work and going to be modified. We're going to look at one more version of the image viewer, and then when we'll take a brief break and we come back, we'll look at objects inside of GUIs called layout managers. So let's go back to our base image viewer. Let's remove that. Can I make a new image viewer? I can. There it is. Notice that my content panel is fairly barren, but if we look closely, there's some other things going on here. We have a bit here that stays at the top, and we have a little bit down here that stays at the bottom. Doesn't matter how I resize, they're tucked there. So let me just look at a couple of the other versions of this project with you. So let's close this, open project, image viewer 2. So with image viewer 2, we start to realize that these things are all filters and maybe they need to have an abstract superclass. If we make our new image viewer and look at our panel, the version 2 is still pretty barren here in the middle. So let's close image viewer 2, open project 3, compile new image viewer. And now when we get to image viewer 3, our interface has changed a little bit more. So let me go ahead and open that London image again. And in addition to our image, there's this region over here where we've added some new interface elements. I can shrink this image down, make it smaller. I can make it larger. And notice that when I'm making it larger after having shrunk it, I have thrown data away previously, and now all I can do is extrapolate from the pixels that I have available, and I get a bit of a chunky display. Make it smaller, make it smaller, make it smaller, make it larger, make it larger, make it larger. And it becomes I don't know, maybe it's similar to like a Paul Klee or something, just kind of blocks of color, a little bit of an abstract art feel. So from what we're going to talk about next, the difference between the previous elements, well, even before the previous elements, notice we still have a region at the top where feedback is given. We have a region at the bottom with the status bar. And now we're able to also specify that part of our frame needs to be dedicated to some other items. We're going to come back and look at layout managers and discuss a little bit about how these pieces get put into our frame.